I still remember the first time I saw my sister's wedding invitation. It was a sleek ivory envelope with gold lettering, the kind you see in those glossy bridal magazines. My name was written in careful cursive, like I was a guest, not family. Inside, tucked behind the RSVP card, was a handwritten note from my sister, April. "Don't wear anything too cheap. We don't want to be embarrassed on our big day." I read it twice, then a third time, trying to convince myself it was a joke. But that was April, blunt, polished, and mean in the way only someone raised to believe the world revolved around her could be. I grew up in a house where my role was forgettable at best, disposable at worst. My dad, Richard, had the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to raise a hand or a voice. He just had to look at you to make you feel 2 inches tall. My mom, Linda, was softer on the surface, but every ounce of that softness was reserved for April. At family dinners, my plate was always the last one to be set down, and often the lightest. If I spoke, April rolled her eyes, and my mom would tell me not to ruin the mood. If I stayed quiet, my dad would ask me why I was sulking. April could spill her juice on my homework, mock my haircut, call me charity case chic because my clothes came from discount outlets, and the only reaction she got from our parents was a laugh. Some kids grow up with bedtime stories and warm hugs. I grew up with silence and the sound of April's laughter ringing in my ears. So when I held that wedding invitation, memories I thought I had buried deep started clawing their way back up. The note wasn't just about a dress. It was a reminder. I was still the outsider in my own family, and yet I knew I had to go. Maybe it was duty, maybe it was masochism, or maybe it was the part of me that still, against all logic, wanted them to see me. But beneath that fragile hope, there was a slow, familiar burn in my chest. A whisper I hadn't let myself hear since I was a kid, left out in the rain, while my sister blew out birthday candles inside. This time, it whispered, "I won't just take it." I wish the wedding invitation was the only thing that brought old memories crawling back. But holding that envelope, I couldn't stop my mind from dragging me into the shadows of my childhood, the nights and weekends that shaped me into the person I am today. One memory is sharper than the rest. I must have been 12. April was 9. We were in the driveway, arguing over a basketball, one of the few things I owned that wasn't a hand-me-down. She snatched it from me, and when I reached to take it back, she screamed bloody murder, collapsing to the ground like I had shoved her. Within seconds, the front door flew open, and my dad stormed out, a brick in his hand. He'd been working on the garden wall. I froze. "What did you do to your sister?" he barked. Before I could even stammer out a defense, the brick left his hand. It hit the gravel next to me, shards of stone scraping my shin. I stumbled backward, and pain shot up my leg. Blood trickled down my ankle, soaking into my sock. My mom rushed out, not to check on me, but to wrap her arms around April. "She's fine," Mom said, brushing April's hair like she was the victim. Dad just looked at me, his face stone cold, his voice low and final. "That's your own fault. Don't make trouble in this house if you can't handle the consequences." Then he turned and walked back inside, leaving me there, bleeding in the gravel. That wasn't the only time. Sometimes it was a slap, sometimes a shove into the wall. But the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the message burned into my brain. You don't belong, and if you get hurt, you probably deserve it. So when I read April's note, "Don't wear anything too cheap. Don't embarrass us," I felt that old sting all over again. I wasn't family. I was an obligation, a shadow. And maybe, for the first time in my life, I felt the anger grow louder than the fear. This wedding wouldn't just be another chance for them to humiliate me. Not if I could help it. The morning of April's wedding arrived like a weight pressing on my chest. I opened my closet and stared at the few clothes I owned that didn't look like they belonged in a thrift store clearance bin. A plain navy dress shirt, black slacks that were a little too loose, and a pair of scuffed brown dress shoes I hadn't worn since community college graduation. I tried to smooth the wrinkles out with my hands. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mom. "Don't dress too poorly. You're just a guest. We don't want anyone feeling sorry for us." I just stared at it for a second, feeling that familiar sting in my chest. Not a "good morning," not a "can't wait to see you." Just a reminder that to them, I was a potential embarrassment. I typed out a reply, then deleted it. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me upset. Instead, I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "Stay calm. Stick to the plan." When I finally stepped outside with my overnight bag, Dad was already leaning on the car horn. "About time," he snapped the second I opened the door. "Do you know how much money this wedding is costing, and you can't even be on time?" I bit my tongue and slid into the back seat. April's fiancé, Jason, had offered to pick me up earlier in the week, but Mom insisted I ride with them. "Family arrives together," she said. Funny, I'd never felt less like family. The drive to St. Andrew's Church was a blur of tense silence, broken only by Dad's muttered complaints about traffic. At one point, he cut off a pickup truck and swerved into the next lane, making the driver blare his horn. "Idiot doesn't know how to drive," Dad barked, as if he hadn't been the one at fault. When we finally arrived, he parked right in front of the church steps. I opened the door to get out, just as Dad swung his door wide, clipping mine and shoving it into my shin. I stumbled, half falling onto the pavement, my knee scraping against the edge of the curb. "Watch where you're going," he muttered, already straightening his tie and walking toward the entrance without a backward glance. No apology, not even a glance to see if I was okay. The pain pulsed up my leg, and for a second, I thought about all the other times he'd hurt me, dismissed me, blamed me. I swallowed the anger, let it settle deep in my chest, and followed them inside. Because today, I wasn't just the forgotten child anymore. Today, I had my own quiet plan, and soon, they'd understand exactly who they had underestimated. The church had been transformed into something out of a wedding magazine. White roses lined the aisle, golden ribbons wrapped around every pew, and a crystal chandelier cast soft light that made the marble floor gleam. Everyone was dressed to impress. Designer dresses, sharp tuxedos, shoes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And there I was, standing in my thrift store navy shirt, trying not to fidget. I barely had time to take in the decorations before Mom spotted me. She gave me a once-over, her lips tightening like she'd just bitten into a lemon. Then she leaned toward April, who was radiant in her lace gown, and whispered something. They both smirked. A group of April's bridesmaids, clustered near the entrance, noticed me too. One of them tilted her head and said just loud enough for me to hear, "Oh, so that's her sister? Huh, she doesn't look too bad, I guess." The others giggled behind their manicured hands. It was the same tone kids had used in high school when pretending to compliment me. Not cruel enough to confront, but sharp enough to cut. When I finally reached the reception hall, I searched for my name card among the beautifully arranged tables. The center tables were for family and close friends, decorated with tall, floral arrangements and gold-plated silverware. My card? It was tucked on a lonely table at the very back of the room, next to the emergency exit, across from the restrooms. The air smelled faintly of industrial cleaner every time the bathroom door swung open. I froze, holding the little card in my hand. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. "This is where you belong." I glanced toward the front of the hall. Mom caught my eye and gave a small, satisfied nod, as if she were watching a chess piece slide perfectly into place. I sat down, feeling my ears burn as laughter and clinking glasses filled the room. From here, I could see April gliding from guest to guest like the perfect bride, the golden daughter. I could hear Dad's booming laugh as he entertained Jason's parents, and I could feel something deep inside me tightening, a mix of humiliation, anger, and a dark, quiet resolve. Because if they wanted to treat me like an outsider at my own sister's wedding, then they had no idea what was coming next. The reception was in full swing. Laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of a jazz quartet floated through the grand hall. From my seat near the restroom, I watched the waiters glide past with trays of champagne flutes, never pausing at my table. Then the music dimmed slightly, and my father, towering, stern, and flushed from wine, stood at the head table with a microphone in hand. He raised his glass, smiling wide for the first time in years. "Tonight," he said, his voice booming, "our family finally has something to be proud of. April, you've made us all so happy. You're everything we could ever want in a daughter." The crowd erupted in applause. People whistled, cheered, lifted their glasses. I forced a smile, my stomach twisting. Then I heard it. A middle-aged guest leaned toward Dad and asked, almost casually, "And what about the bride's sister? What's she up to these days?" I held my breath. Maybe, just maybe, Dad would give a polite answer. Something neutral. He didn't. Dad chuckled, loud enough for a few nearby tables to hear. "Oh, her? She just kind of wanders. Doesn't do much. Always, sponging off someone." A ripple of laughter passed through the closest guests. Someone actually snorted. I froze. The sting was sharp but familiar, like an old scar tearing open. I stared down at my untouched plate of cold chicken and asparagus, willing myself not to cry. Not here, not in front of them. Slowly, I pushed my chair back. No one noticed. No one cared. I slipped out the side door into the cool night air, the muffled sound of clinking glasses and applause trailing behind me. My hands were trembling, but my mind was clear. This was it. The last straw. They had made sure I'd never forget my place in this family. And now, I was done playing the role they wrote for me. I stood outside the banquet hall, the cold night air cooling the heat in my chest. The laughter and music inside felt a world away, like it belonged to a family I was never truly part of. But they had no idea. I had been preparing for this moment for years. I pulled my phone from my clutch and scrolled through a hidden folder I'd kept since high school. Inside were the fragments of my life they wanted everyone to forget. Videos of my father shoving me against the garage door, yelling that I was a mistake, and my mother turning away, muttering, "Don't provoke him if you don't want this." Screenshots of my mother's texts. "Stop embarrassing your sister. We only need one success in this family. Don't come home if you can't be useful." Bank statements proving they had emptied the college fund my grandmother left me, the one thing I thought was safe, to pay for April's dream wedding and honeymoon in Maui. Every memory they'd tried to bury was in my pocket, neatly labeled and time-stamped. And tonight, the world would see it. 2 weeks ago, when my mother sent that snide text about not dressing cheap, I knew I couldn't let this wedding pass without showing people who they truly were. I'd called the event coordinator ahead of time and offered to provide a surprise slideshow for the bride and groom. All it took was handing a USB drive to a smiling young employee earlier tonight. I told him, "Please cue this right after the father of the bride speech. It's a special family tribute. And now, the timing couldn't have been better. I slipped back into the hall, heart pounding but face calm. Everyone was still laughing, dancing, drunk on champagne and self-congratulation. I took a seat near the side door, close enough to see the giant projector screen, but far enough to slip away if needed. Then the lights dimmed. A wedding slideshow began with soft piano music. April in her graduation gown, April hugging our parents, April twirling in her wedding dress. Guests cooed and clapped. Then, at the 2-minute mark, the screen flickered. The next video was me, at 16, cowering in the driveway as my dad threw a brick onto the ground inches from my knees. My voice trembled from behind the camera. "Please stop. Please." Gasps rippled across the room. The slideshow rolled on. Screenshots of my mother's cruel texts, photos of my bruised legs, and finally, the bank statements highlighting thousands transferred out of my account labeled College Fund into a new account labeled April Wedding. I watched the color drain from my parents' faces under the soft glow of the projector. Every guest saw the truth I'd carried alone for years. This was just the beginning. The room went silent. The soft piano music cut off mid-note, and in its place, the projector lit up with the harsh reality of our family. First came the videos. My teenage self, trembling in our cracked driveway. My father pacing with a brick in his hand, yelling, "You're useless!" Then, the moment that made the entire hall gasp. He hurled it down inches from my legs, gravel flying, my voice whispering off camera, "Please stop." The audio was raw, unedited, and devastating. Then came the clip I knew would break the room. My mother's voice, cold as ice. "That's what trash like you deserves." I could feel the collective shift in the crowd. Forks froze midair. Champagne glasses trembled in hands. Someone near the front whispered, "Oh my God." Another guest muttered, I didn't know." Faces turned toward my parents, and I watched their carefully constructed social armor crack. My father's jaw twitched. My mother's eyes darted to the floor. The slideshow didn't spare them. It rolled into screenshots of text messages. "Don't embarrass April at her wedding." "We only need one successful daughter, and it's not you." Then, in bold red highlights on a bank statement, "Transfer, College Fund to April Wedding account." Whispers grew into a low, horrified murmur. Guests, neighbors, family friends, even April's in-laws shifted uncomfortably in their seats, staring at my parents like strangers. Suddenly, April's voice cut through the tension, high and cracking. Why are you doing this?" All eyes turned to me as I stepped into the center of the hall. My heels echoed on the polished floor, the same way my father's footsteps once echoed in that driveway. I looked straight at April, at the sister who had always smiled as I was pushed aside. My voice was steady, but it carried the weight of years. Because today, everyone finally sees the truth. This is the real family you've been celebrating. April shook her head, tears threatening to ruin her perfect makeup. Her groom stood frozen, caught between comforting her and absorbing the horror of the family he'd married into. I turned toward the guests, letting the silence breathe. You all laughed with them. You all saw the happy pictures, but not one of you saw what it cost me. The final slide flashed across the screen. A family photo. April in the center, parents on each side, and me cut off halfway at the edge like an afterthought. Then the screen went black. The only sound left in the hall was the heavy, shameful breathing of my parents. And I stood there, finally, in the light. The silence in the ballroom fractured under the weight of whispered judgments. April's groom, Ben, stared at the black screen, his mouth slightly open. His parents, seated at the VIP table, exchanged a glance that said everything. Alarm, disgust, and a swift calculation of their next move. Mrs. Holloway, his mother, finally stood up, voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. "We will not let our son tie himself to a family like this. This wedding is over." Gasps rippled across the hall. April's perfect posture collapsed. Her knees wobbled as she clutched the edge of the sweetheart table. Ben didn't move to catch her. He just stood there, pale, absorbing the fallout like a man realizing he'd stepped into a minefield. One by one, guests began to leave. The first few went quietly, eyes down, but soon chairs scraped and heels clicked across the marble floor. Some whispered to each other as they passed me, avoiding my eyes. Others didn't bother hiding their expressions of pity or satisfaction. The grand, candlelit hall that was supposed to host the happiest night of my family's life was emptying like a sinking ship. That's when my father snapped. He surged toward me, face crimson, teeth bared in a snarl. "You ungrateful little—" Before his hand could even raise, 2 uniformed security guards intercepted him, exactly as I had requested when I handed over the USB earlier. I'd warned the manager, in a quiet and calm voice, that my father had a history of angry outbursts. They held him back, his shoes scraping against the floor, spitting curses that only made the departing guests shake their heads faster. My mother didn't move. She just stood in her glittering silver gown, frozen, mascara starting to streak, staring at me like she didn't recognize the person in front of her. April was on the floor now, veil crumpled, mumbling through tears. "This can't be happening. This can't." I turned and walked out slowly, deliberately, letting every remaining guest and family member see me leave in control, while the family that had always belittled me crumbled behind. The heavy ballroom doors shut behind me with a thud that felt like closure. Months have passed since that night, the night everything changed. I don't think about them the way I used to. Not with bitterness or rage, but with clarity. I didn't win by breaking them down. I won by finally standing up for myself, by refusing to be invisible anymore, by reclaiming the life I deserved all along. Freedom doesn't come in grand gestures. It's in the quiet mornings where I wake without a knot in my stomach. In the simple joy of making art under my own name, not theirs. In friendships built on respect, not obligation. I still carry scars, some visible, many hidden. But those scars are proof I survived, and that survival is my victory. As I look back, I realize something important. The hardest battles are not with others, but within ourselves. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is walk away from the pain we were never meant to endure. So, if you're watching this, feeling trapped, unheard, or underestimated, know this: your worth is not defined by those who refuse to see it. You have the power to rewrite your story. And maybe, just maybe, your freedom is waiting on the other side of your silence. Thank you for listening to my story.